Hello and welcome to Better Business Podcast. My name is Alexi, and you're listening to another amazing episode with another great business owner straight out of Nashville, Tennessee. How you going there, Dennis?
I'm going great. Thank you, Alexi.
Now,
How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks. Not bad for a rainy day here in not so sunny Brisbane today. Denis O'Shea runs a business called Mobile Mentor. Now, the name doesn't speak for itself, but I'll let Denis do all the talking here. It's an IT services company that does things very, very different. In fact, these guys are international. They are in Australia, New Zealand, and USA, obviously. Denis, how did this all happen, mate? Tell us about Mobile Mentor.
Thank you. Well, I used to work for Nokia back in the day when Nokia was making cell phone networks and selling smartphones and all of that. And I could see a huge problem emerging, which was that the technology had got ahead of people. And what was happening was people were going out and spending about $1,000 and buying this cool new smartphone. And guess what they were using it for? Text messaging and phone calls. And basically they weren't using the technology as it was designed or intended. So I did a bit of research trying to figure out how to unlock that. And eventually I left Nokia and I set up this company, Mobile Mentor. And the idea was to spend 1 hour with a business person who had just got their first smartphone and enable that person to use the smartphone in the most productive way possible. So get email working, get calendar syncing, transfer all their contacts from their old phone, get a web browsing enabled. And I don't know if you can cast your mind back 20 years ago, but getting all those things working was insanely difficult. It was really, really hard. Like getting email set up, you needed 2 different server addresses, and to do the sync, you needed this funky little cable. You shoved one end of the cable up the bum of the phone and the other into your computer, and you did the zip zap syncing, and getting your music on it was hard, and getting web browsing was hard. Everything was just painful. And so what we used to do was go out and spend an hour with a business owner or a business person who just got their first Nokia smartphone or Sony Ericsson or BlackBerry, and help them get everything working. And so that's where we started.
Mate, it sounds like you got a lot of museum terms coming into play. BlackBerry, Nokia. I mean, look, I don't mean to offend you, but these technologies, are they even still around? What's happening with BlackBerry these days?
The BlackBerry, the phone business that we all knew and loved or hated back then, that's gone. Nokia's phone business is pretty much gone. So is Sony Ericsson, so is Motorola. This industry has a big graveyard. Or that industry. I'm not really in that industry anymore, but there's a big graveyard of all the players who were huge once upon a time.
Absolutely.
And now basically they've ceded it all to, iPhone and Samsung.
Yeah. Well, the things that you've mentioned, syncing calendars, organizing things, getting it for browsing, 20 years ago, that would have been amazing. But majority of people didn't even know about that sort of stuff. They weren't using the phones that way. I mean, it sounds like you really knew what the customer needed at the time, but did they really want that? Was there a need for that particular thing?
They did. It's a good question you ask. We did a ton of research to figure out what was actually going on. And we spoke to the carriers, Telstra and Optus, and to all their dealers, spoke to the manufacturers, and spoke to a lot of businesses, hundreds of businesses, to figure out what's going on. Why are people not using the cellular technology? And if you think back to then, people are spending billions of dollars buying the spectrum, the licenses to run the cellular networks, and billions of dollars building towers everywhere and putting in all the infrastructure, and then crap loads of money on the smartphone. So there was a real pressing need to get this technology working. And we decided, let's try and kickstart this one person at a time. So that was the genesis. Was we could see people were frustrated. The whole industry was frustrated. And what we did was we said, we'll sit down with somebody for 1 hour, help them get that person going. And we did that for 1 million people, 1 million people across Australia, New Zealand, then Brazil, China, and some European countries. And so we got the wave going.
Okay. And back then, in terms of the actual foundations to the technology, I mean, internet was a lot slower. The whole Google and Microsoft didn't have the products specifically to fit the market. What was the solution? Did you have to work with multiple different tools to create that solution? Or, how did you approach that?
We did. We had a number of tools and to do the synchronization, the setup, and it was still very painful, very painful the first 2 or 3 years. It suddenly got way easier when the iPhone came out. as you can imagine, in 2007, 2008, iPhone had a whole bunch of features and capabilities that just made it super easy to get things working. So that was the beginning. That was the beginning of a whole new phase, and it was the beginning of the end for us, because no longer would people need that 1 hour of personalized assistance to get their smartphone working. So the landscape started changing. And at that point, we decided to change our business as well and get out of that business of providing 1 hour of setup and get more into the business of helping companies manage all the mobile phones they now had and help them manage their security risk and manage all their costs, because they had costs blowing out all the time, and then help them build apps to make the smartphone even smarter and
Mm.
more productive for them. So we started to shift our business around 2008, I think, coming out of that period.
Okay. Now, fast forward to 2024. I mean, what are you finding different from the user perspective? We have obviously flipped the market from the actual device use, but how is this actually, happening fundamentally? Are you finding that users are still requiring a lot of support, and there's still a lot of unsolved problems behind the scenes?
Users don't need support today in the way they did 20 years ago. However, what's happening now is almost everybody in business is using Microsoft 365. That's the productivity power horse used by almost all organizations. There's a small percentage on G Suite, but the vast majority are on Microsoft 365. Even Mac users end up using, Microsoft 365 or Office 365. So that's kind of the underlying platform. And then we've got AI on top of that, and 90 something percent of people tinkering with AI. And therein lies one of the greatest challenges of our era, because most employees now are pasting stuff into AI to get it summarized or do some research or reformat or whatever. And that's when we say bye-bye to our company data, because we've now put it into a public large language model. So there's a huge security risk there. And the other big thing happening, of course, is people are working remotely. There's so much hybrid work happening. We do it in our company. We're in the office 1 or 2 days a week. We're working from home. We're traveling again. So we're actually, as a workforce, we are probably more mobile now than we were pre-pandemic. And we're more at risk because we're using a wide range of devices in different places on different Wi-Fi networks. We're using AI. There's a big risk of our company data leaking out into the open AI models, because our employees are just pasting stuff into ChatGPT. And there's also a big risk of AI-enabled viruses and scams and phishing attacks and all sorts of malicious stuff getting into our companies. So the landscape is very different now to where it was 20 years ago. I look back now almost with nostalgia and thinking, biggest challenge we had was trying to set up email on a smartphone. How hard could that be? The challenges today are much bigger and broader.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's a completely different world. But, I'm always quite surprised that the simpler the technology becomes, the more reliant people get on that technology without even realizing how reliant they are. I mean, look, 20 years ago, you ask someone, to look at a website on the mobile phone, you'd probably get, 2 or 3 users. Now, 95%, I would say with confidence overall, would be browsing websites using their mobile phones. Now,
Absolutely.
there's obviously, there's different scams, there's different fraudulent activity going on as well. And when it comes to companies like yours, IT services very generally, but what is it that you guys do these days? What's the 80/20 behind your business right now?
I would say the 80/20 is helping our clients get a good, sensible balance between security and the user experience or user productivity. That's the key thing. And if you take a purist approach to IT these days and just put in lots and lots of security, your employees are just going to find ways to work around it. We know that because we do research. So we know if you apply too much security, employees will just start using Gmail and Dropbox and find other ways to do things because they can't be asked dealing with all the security. But if you don't have enough security, your company data is going to leak or get breached. So it's in our eyes, it's all about getting a sensible balance and kind of meeting employees where they are. We know they're working remotely. We know they're using personal devices part of the day. We know they're certainly using personal smartphones and maybe a MacBook and other things. So we've got to take the approach that we've got to protect the data, even if we don't manage that underlying device. So we might not manage the MacBook or person's smartphone, but we've got to wrap a layer of security around the data so it can't be compromised, or at least not easily. That's what we see as the main game in town now, getting the right balance.
Okay.
Make it usable and sustainable.
Yeah. Well, lucky I've got an IT background to maintain this conversation on fair terms. But I must say, one thing I've observed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the IT companies have gone from the traditional hardware support where things break and needed the setup towards more the security and usability and more the quality of service. Would that be a right thing to say?
Yeah.
And why do you think that happened?
Totally. Well, most organizations are moving away from having a rack full of servers and equipment in the office, and now it's all about, accessing cloud services. So the traditional MSP or managed service provider is no longer managing lots of on-premise IT hardware. It's more about providing services and enablement and provisioning users quickly and keeping them secure. So that business has changed quite a bit and will continue to change with AI. It's going to keep changing rapidly. And we're right in the middle of that game and that transformation in real time. The other key part of this, of course, is the security is so important. I mentioned that before, but most organizations are using Microsoft 365 to a certain extent, but not enough. And one of the things we like to do is start any new client engagement with an assessment to see how much value are you actually getting today from the licenses you've already purchased. And we do this assessment and give them a score out of 100. And it's often quite depressing when you realize that, oh my God, we're paying all this money for these licenses, and we're only using 30 something or maybe 40 something % of the capability. And then we're paying for other products to do the same things. And we've got all these overlapping technologies, and none of them are being used fully. So there's a real need, in particular in small to medium business, to get a clear grip on which platforms are going to be the center of our universe. Make those our platforms and build on top of them, rather than just having this colorful quilt of lots of different technologies and products that we're not getting good value from. It's a big theme.
Absolutely. Well, look, you've touched on AI briefly, and yes, it is a thing right now. Obviously, everyone tries to, use it to their advantage. I still actually find probably majority of people have no idea how to use it properly. But anyway, that's a separate topic. With larger companies that I come across, they've got very strict policies where they wouldn't allow even tools like Grammarly, for example, that sort of corrects your spelling and the formulation of your sentences, because obviously it leaks information to third party. Things like the Copilot or Gemini or anything like that, it's also not allowed majority of the time because it's leaking data. And they go as pedantic as disallowing things like Google Analytics, because that also leaks company data as well. Now, from the perspective, of efficiency, productivity, and so on, is there an equivalent to substitute for some of those tools within a company environment that doesn't leak data that you come across?
I guess Microsoft Copilot is the closest thing we're going to find, because that is within your Microsoft tenant. Okay. So if you're using Office 365 or Microsoft 365 and you're using Copilot as your AI engine, and you've set some rules, kind of put a box around it, then you can protect your company data leaking out of the company. You can say, Copilot is going to be our AI engine. It's built on the same technology as ChatGPT, but we're going to keep our data within our tenant and not allow it to leak outside onto the public ChatGPT.
Okay.
So that's probably the best thing we can do. That's not enough. The other thing we have to do, of course, if we're using Copilot inside the company, is we also have to protect our data from our own employees, because now there's a huge risk that somebody could look up, show me my payslip, and you find somebody else's payslip. Show me HR records. Show me written warnings. And suddenly you start finding all sorts of stuff from other employees or things you weren't meant to find. So companies have now got that insider risk. So making sure that they're not inadvertently exposing data to people internally simply because they've got a Copilot license. And as you know, AI will find anything and everything. So we've got to be careful. We protect what we have in-house from ourselves, but also protect that data, make sure it doesn't leak out onto the World Wide Web.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you ensure this over, people working from home? Obviously, we still have a fairly large portion of the workforce, having that flexible arrangement or sometimes fully working from home.
Yeah.
Large corporation, I get it. They may have a very specific setup. They may have company equipment, but with small businesses, a lot of the time, small business owners don't really know about these things. Have you got any advice specifically for small business owners when it comes to remote workers and making sure that data doesn't leak? Is there a process or is there a tool that may help?
There's a number of tools that can help. So firstly, trying to manage the devices owned by employees and small businesses, that's really hard. That's not a battle most organizations can win. So instead, the battle you can win is to protect the data, wrap some security policies around the data that prevent things like copy paste actions or save as actions. So for example, if you're using a personal smartphone, you own it, you paid for it with your own credit card, you probably don't want somebody else managing it and having control of it, right?
Yep.
But if you're accessing your company's email and you're getting attachments and you're getting Teams messages and you got all the company contacts, you're probably okay realizing that that company information is protected. And so there's modern technology from Microsoft now called Intune that would protect the data without managing the underlying device. And that's really elegant. And that's what we do for most hospitals, universities, a lot of businesses where they don't want the device managed, but they absolutely unconditionally have to protect their data.
Hmm.
And then if an employee tries to do something inappropriate, let's say you try and forward an email from Outlook to Gmail, that'll get blocked. Or if you try and save a work attachment into Dropbox, that'll get blocked. Or if you try and take a screenshot of a patient record on a screen, that'll get blocked. So it's all about protecting the data rather than trying to manage the device itself. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And how do you find this differs across the different countries? Obviously, you've got clients across, US, New Zealand, Australia. Are you finding that the user behavior and the problems are similar, or are there some, very, very specific differences between the different markets and how the users behave?
Interesting you asked that. We just did a round of research in Australia, the USA, and the UK to understand people's views on security and privacy and a few other things. Australia is an outlier. So, if I recall correctly, the US and the UK both, we asked them the question, what's more important to you, your personal privacy or your company security? And in the UK and the USA, I think it was 70% of people said my personal privacy. In Australia, it was 82%, much higher. And 2 years ago, when we did this, Australia was also about 70%, but it grew to 82% in the last 2 years. We think the reasons were the Medibank and the Optus breaches. They're the most notable top line ones. There were a bunch of others, as you know. And we believe they were so impactful and so horrible. People had to change their driver's licenses and stuff like that. That has essentially changed the psyche of a nation and made people a lot more focused on their privacy than company security. And we haven't seen that shift happen in the US or the UK yet, and I hope it won't happen. But Australia has had an unfair share of privacy breaches, which has really dialed up people's awareness of privacy.
Absolutely. Well, we had the PricewaterhouseCoopers, we had the Ticketmaster, we had a few more recently that have affected a few people. And you think Ticketmaster, that's got a lot of data connected to it, even though that doesn't seem as serious as, let's say, the telco company like Optus. But anyway,
Yeah,
do you think it's
they've got
because of
everyone's
the
credit card.
well, credit card? Yeah, I mean, do you think there are some fundamental, issues that need to be resolved for these sort of breaches not to happen? I mean, does the US have fundamentally different system in terms of validating users, or is there some sort of a different, I don't know, ID check type thing behind scene? Like, is there a fundamental difference to US and, let's say, Australia when it comes to all this stuff?
I'm not sure there's any big fundamental difference, but where I am seeing differences is the US is generally pretty quick to adopt new technology because a lot of the technology comes out of the US. So
That's
I
right.
guess there's a willingness to adopt it here. And the thing that is most useful nowadays is going passwordless, getting rid of the passwords.
Hmm.
Because when you think about it, passwords are the number one reason for all these hacks. Somebody somebody's credentials get compromised, a bad actor gets into the environment, can get access to a database, get all the credit card numbers or whatever. And so, if we think back, passwords were actually a great invention back in 1961, right? It was 1961. What other technology are we still using today from the 1960s? There's not a lot, right? We've killed the fax, we killed the telex. There's not a lot we're still using, but we're still reliant on passwords. And the crazy thing is we're using more passwords now than ever before in history. And they're the single biggest weakness in the whole information ecosystem. So the best advice I can give any business owner is do everything you can to embrace going passwordless. Buy laptops that have biometrics. So the camera, scan your face. Smartphones obviously have had it for years. When you buy new applications, make sure they got single sign-on. Insist on everybody having multi-factor authentication. Embrace these things because it means we can get away from passwords, or at least we can get down to one password and we can make that a very long sentence. The cow jumped over the moon and fell and broke his back, whatever, something really long and obscure. No one's going to hack that. And that gets you into maybe a password vault where you have a few others. But we want to get away from this idea where we've got 110 passwords each, which is where, some countries are today. That's a nightmare. And people can't remember them all, so they find easy hacks. They use their pet's name, they use their street address, they use their date of birth, or if they have to change them every 90 days, they just whack on a number or a season. We're lazy. We're lazy human beings. We're not walking computers, so we can't process 110 unique, strong passwords with alphanumeric characters. We find hacks, and then we get breached. So, single biggest thing we can do: go passwordless.
And what do you think the future of that is looking like? I mean, obviously, over the last, let's say, decade, we've enforced things like the authenticators and stuff on our phones that allow us to obviously have that random series of numbers to log in somewhere. We've got the SMS and email confirmations coming through. We've got the capture. Sometimes we've got, all of the above being used as well. Where do you reckon it's going? Is there like something that you reckon is the future, or is there something else that we don't know about that could be a lot more practical and a lot more user friendly? Because, like you said, majority of users, if something is too complicated, they have the tendency of writing it down. Once it's written down, anyone can find it. So it's almost like there's no sweet spot. Is there some sort of technology that we don't know about or something on the radar that may potentially solve this?
There may be. I've got a vision for that, which I've never seen any technology vendor talk about yet, but the notion of monitoring someone's behavior at a micro level. So what I mean by that is, if you think about when you wake up in the morning, Alexi, I bet you use your phone in a certain way that's unique to you. You probably do certain things first and then second and third, whether it's looking at news apps or social apps or the weather or whatever. You probably hold your phone a certain way at a certain angle with a certain amount of tilt and a certain amount of vibration without even realizing it. So the way you're using your device is probably different to anybody else on the planet. But the way you use the apps, the way you type on things, you might miss some keys, you hit others right in the middle, you make some common typos, and we all make the same kinds of mistakes with it when we're typing. And again, the way you hold it. So I've got this vision that we would authenticate once, and then the gyroscope on the device and all the sensors and accelerometers and all those things would monitor how the device is being used. And if it's Alexi's normal pattern of holding and using the device throughout the day, never ask you for a password again. Don't bug the user if it appears to be the same person. But now if it's a different person holding the device at a different angle with a different tilt and a different level of vibration and looking at things differently, absolutely ask for passwords and sign-ins and prompts and two-factor and all the rest of it. So this notion of authenticate once, but then monitor that it's the right person using it throughout, and only prompt again if it looks like something has changed.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step aside a little bit. I want to talk about the problem of content versus context, especially when it comes to customer inquiries. A lot of the time, and this is a formulation that I've recently heard, and I'll explain that in a minute, I get a lot of customers coming in and asking a question about, hey, can you, let's say, fix my website? Or can you do this for me? Obviously, I've got a digital marketing agency, hence why the questions. So can you fix a website? Can you do this for me? And you go, yes, yes, no worries, you deliver that service. But sometimes you fail to see the context of that particular situation from a big picture perspective, where a business actually doesn't need a new website. They may actually be better off focusing on something completely different. But oftentimes the companies fail to ask that question in order to identify that. And as a result, the company doesn't really get the solution to the deeper problems that they see. I'm sure you may see this all the time. And the whole situation of proactive versus reactive must come in as well, because a lot of people would approach, IT company, a security company, from the perspective of, hey, we've been hacked, help. So my question is, how do you uncover the context of a situation from a question being asked about something very small and allude to the bigger problem? Is that a thing in your business?
Absolutely is a thing. I'm glad you asked that. We we used to approach that in quite a linear way, just asking a few questions to understand what's the issue. Now what we tend to do is take a step back and we do an assessment with the customer. It's a bigger assessment. We go through about 60 different topics, but we've figured out how to do this in about an hour. So we can have a 1 hour meeting with somebody, cover the 60 topics, and we tell them up front, this is going to be a friendly interrogation. I'm going to ask you 60 questions in 60 minutes. That's the speed we're going to go at. But we get all this rich contextual information around what's going on, what technologies are they using, how far have they gone with the deployment of the technology they're trying to get working. And then we also ask a bunch of questions about the capacity of their IT team. So if they have an IT team, we try and figure out what's the capacity of the team to fix it themselves. Because in some cases, they will have a strong IT team and they just need some good guidance or mentorship to fix it. Other times they'll say, we've got nobody, or we're smashed, we've got too much work. We actually need somebody to come in and do it for us and give us a working result. So we'll do that assessment. We call it capability and capacity. And we've done over 100 of those now in the last year. So it's getting to be lots of fun now, because we can show people how they compare to others and where they're strong and where they've got room for improvement. And then we can build a roadmap and say, right, based on what you told us, based on where you sit compared to others, here's what a logical roadmap looks like. Here's what crawl, walk, run looks like in terms of how we get this done and get the result you're looking for.
Oh, great. And is
We
this
found that methodology is really, really powerful.
and is this consultation paid, free, or is this your like onboarding process? How does that sort of come into play?
Look, it's a bit of both. It has a value because we're putting a number of hours of effort into it and some senior people. So it has a value, but in many cases, if we've got a well-qualified prospect, we'll waive the charge and we'll do it free of charge. It's our pre-sales investment, you could say.
Okay.
And then out the other end, we give the client this roadmap and a whole bunch of other useful resources that blows them away. They don't expect that. And they generally say, oh my God, this is great. Can you present this again to my boss or some other people in the organization? And now we've established a base of trust and a platform to work from.
Yeah. Well, the whole IT, problems or IT disasters, if you like, sometimes feels like a chicken or the egg situation from the perspective of, hey, if you would have known this sort of stuff, you could have taken action. I think there's plenty of information right now around what the IT setup's supposed to be like, about the antiviruses, about AI and all the other things. But in my opinion, I think a lot of business owners are pure ignorant when it comes to IT setup and security. Would that be, would that be the right thing to say? Would you agree?
Well, I'd be reluctant to use the word ignorant, but what I will say, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Like mid-sized companies today average between 52 and 82 different security tools. Different tools. So it's not enough to have antivirus and MFA and all the basics. There's a whole bunch of additional complexity to be really secure now. And if you want to meet Essential 8 in Australia or get through some kind of audit, or your insurance provider is asking for evidence that you've got all your baselines in place, it's getting hard, man. It's really, really getting hard because it's so complex and there's so many things that can potentially go wrong. Even though we're in that business, it's a massive pain in the ass for us. Trying to make sure that we've got all our own security in order so we can get through audits we have to do for our customers and prove that we are, the right standard and get insurances and all that. So I wouldn't say that business owners are ignorant. I would say business owners are overwhelmed with the complexity. And of course, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is trying to sell them another security tool. So it's overwhelming.
Mm. Well, look, from a marketing perspective, I do find that a lot of IT companies are really, really struggling to market themselves. They try Google Ads, they try
Yeah.
SEO, they tried all sorts of things, and overall, they get very mediocre results. I mean, why do you think that happens? Is that is that just a problem of too many IT companies, or is there a more of a fundamental problem to the whole thing?
Look, it's two problems in my mind. It's too much selling based on FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt by the product vendors. Telling you you're going to get hacked, you're going to get breached, you're going to lose all your data, it's going to cost you millions, you're going to be out of business. That kind of marketing I find to be really disingenuous, but that's how a lot of security and technology marketing happens today, based on fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And then for the IT service providers, it's a tough game. It's hard to differentiate yourself. You understand this from a marketing perspective, how you differentiate yourself as a marketing agency. I've got to differentiate myself as an IT service provider. I know there are 80,000 IT service providers in the world. Right? Where do you start? How do you stand out? How do you be different? How do you get someone's attention? How do you get the attention of people like Microsoft and the big players in the market when you're one of 80,000? So it's a differentiation problem, and making sure that you are unique enough to stand out and get noticed and stand for something.
Yeah. Well, look, to me, the problem doesn't seem that difficult. I mean, I'm going to be, a little bit adventurous to make this claim right now, but I can tell you that the biggest problem most businesses are making is they think that everybody is their customer, first of all. If you think that your customer is the same customer that all the other 80,000 companies could be after, then this exercise doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to really understand who the ideal customer is, your potential competition and your target market really changes. The dynamics of the game really start to change. If you then start to understand exactly the problems of your market from the perspective of wants, fears, and desires, you then shrink that down further. And overall, really what you're looking to achieve is you want to get into a market where it's inch wide and mile deep. Because if you can narrow down to that point, that's where you may end up with maybe 100 competitors. And most of them actually will be likely to be your partners, because once you actually get to know them, you will see that they solve a completely different problem for that similar market. Now, I do, I do a lot of personal development. I read a lot of books. One of my good friends, Alan Dibb, has just released a book called Lean Marketing. If you want to know more about that, that's the sort of stuff that he covers. But it's interesting enough. I actually bumped into him 3 weeks ago at a conference here in on the Gold Coast, actually. And all this information is coming from our common mentor, Mel Emery, who is one of Dan Kennedy's disciples here in Australia. In fact, he's considered the direct response marketing father in Australia. So that's the sort of person. And look, when we talk marketing, I think a lot of the time we perceive the whole problem from that same perspective. And I think when it comes to IT services, it's no different either. Everyone's got their own perception, but somehow, in the opinion of business owner, I feel they see it in exactly the same light. So my question to you is, how do you think you can really position yourself different to your closest competitors? Question for you.
You mean from my business?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's an interesting one. I moved from New Zealand to the USA 7 years ago, and I knew one person. So I was basically starting out trying to build a business here with no network, no clients, no prospects, nothing, absolutely nothing. And what I chose to do was to build a partnership with Microsoft, and they've been amazing. And do so by becoming the best in the world at one particular technology. And so I said right from the beginning, our mission is to become the best in the world at this technology. It's called Microsoft Intune, for managing all these devices and securing them and all that. And that's what we've been doing. And I've got a fantastic team, absolutely amazing team. And they all got behind this. And we did become the best in the world. And we won the Microsoft Award for Global Partner of the Year. And we've been a finalist every year for the last 4 years. So we built a reputation for doing one thing really, really well. Whereas most IT providers in the market are trying to cover all your technology and say, we'll take care of all your stuff, your printers and firewalls and servers and computers and blah, blah. And we say, no, we can't do all that. We're going to do one thing really well, try and be the best in the world at that one thing. And because of that, then our market is an inch wide, as you said, but it's a mile deep. And we've been able to pick up clients that have up to 1 million devices because they need a specialist to manage the amount of complexity they have, and got a lot of clients at 50,000 devices, and then a whole bunch of smaller ones at 20 or 50 or 100, but they need that expertise. So that was our strategy: be super narrow and be bold enough to say no to a ton of other things.
Wow.
And so quite often when a meeting starts and people say, so what do you do? I'll often start by telling them all the things we don't do. Say, we're not going to be your partner to help you with Teams or SharePoint or moving your data center or blah, 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 blah. We're not going to do any of those things. But if you want someone to modernize the way you set up and manage all your devices and keep your users secure, that's us.
That's super powerful, mate. I mean, I'm not sure you realize the magnitude of that message. I think a lot of people really, really struggle to get that clear on the whole thing. And look, the closest thing I can give to our listeners is Amazon. Amazon started as a store selling books online, but they got so good at the whole thing, they became the biggest and the best when it came to selling books online. And then from there, they've been able to add audios and videos on the whole thing as well. And that allowed them to grow the market and then obviously expand it across everything else as well. But if they were to start as just a shop selling everything online, I don't think they would have been able to replicate that success. So that's the power of saying no to everything and focusing on the one thing, doing it really, really well, and then be able to actually expand that based on the solutions that you offer. Mate, that's awesome. I thought I'd just draw that parallel in case people are wondering what the hell are we talking about. I think this episode is going to be absolutely gold to anyone who is in the IT services, because a lot of the time we're dealing with really, really smart people that really fail to understand the simple, fundamental concepts that really do allow them to position themselves completely different. The fact that you use the word specialist and expert really means to me that you understand the whole idea of positioning yourself and really focusing on that one major problem of your audience that leads to everything else, mate. To me, that's awesome. That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. You. It's
Mate,
a journey. It's a journey. Are we the best in the world? Probably not. Are we on a journey to become the best in the world? Absolutely, 100% all day, every day. And it's about having a mission, having the whole team lined up behind that and be able to articulate that with confidence.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess it really depends how you look at the whole situation of being the first or the leader. Because, like, look, if we're going to look into, let's say, world sprinters, for example, right? You got Usain Bolt ahead of the world, right? But the guy who's coming second or the third, he is not a second behind, not 2 seconds. He's like fraction of a second. He's just a little teeny weeny way away. Now the second guy gets the silver, the third guy gets the bronze, the fourth guy no one really knows about, but he's only one little fragment away. Do you reckon he's a better runner? No, he's amazing. He's better than most of us combined here. But when it comes to delivering a service, these are the sort of people you really want to be guided by. These are the sort of people you want to be learning from, because at the end of the day, to me, they all winners. They all, in the top 1%, mate. Yeah, incredible stuff. Yeah. Now, New Zealand, Australia, USA, mate, how do you do it? I mean, everyone's got 24 hours in a day, and sometimes for me that's not enough. How do you manage all that? I mean, you've obviously got quite a few employees, you've got quite a few customers. What's the secret?
We've got a highly distributed team, and the team is based in the markets where their customers are, and they're empowered to do what they need to do. So we rely on the team. We've got very good people who've been in this kind of business before, either working for us for a long time, or actually since I moved to the US, I've been able to tap into a very rich vein of talent of people who have built and scaled managed service companies in a way that I could never have even dreamed about. And so I'm bringing those people into the business over time. They're bringing in their friends and advisors. And so we're building scale, we're building momentum by adding talent and people who can move the needle and do great things. But most of those people are in the markets close to their customers.
Okay, that's a good way to look at it. Okay, well, mate, we've covered.
Yeah, sorry. And the other thing, just to be clear, is we try and operate as one team, one dream, even though we're in different geographies. But we think about geography just like you might think of different cities in Australia. You know, whether someone's in Washington, D.C. or California or Nashville, Tennessee, just like being Melbourne, Sydney, Gold Coast. It doesn't really matter where we are, as long as we're all on the call on time. We turn up, we do our thing, we have the knowledge we're meant to have. We basically kind of iron out geography nowadays. It doesn't matter anymore.
So your I guess time zones and everything is not really an issue for you anymore?
Oh, it's an issue, and a lot of my staff complain about it and say it's a massive pain in the ass because they have to work evenings, or the guys in New Zealand have to get up early in the morning. So it's still a factor and it's an inconvenience, but it's not a hindrance. You know, we can have experts in the US working on a customer problem in Australia, or we can have people in Australia engaging on a webinar that's happening in the US. And that's wonderful. We're sharing the best of the best at any point in time.
Awesome.
It's great we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think majority of customers would appreciate working with the best from your team as opposed to just anyone. I think a lot of people will be quite happy with that compromise. Great. Yeah. Now, we've covered a lot of different things today. One thing that I like to do with our guests is run this section called Rapid Fire. This is where I ask you a pretty, basic question, and I want a pretty basic answer. Are you ready?
I don't know if I'm going to be any good at this, but let's have a go.
Let's give it a shot. All right. Well, you've obviously traveled quite a lot. You're a citizen of the world based on our prior conversation. What is the best place for a holiday in your opinion?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Beautiful.
South Island.
Okay. Anywhere more specific?
The Wanaka area of the South Island.
Oh, nice, nice. So Queenstown and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I've been there once. A nice, very nice place. I got to ask you this question. You're a very savvy IT guy. So Apple or Android?
Apple.
Why is that?
User experience.
Okay. User experience. Yeah. In the end,
and security.
Okay.
The right balance of security and user experience.
Okay. And look, if you weren't doing this, what do you think you'd be doing?
I'd be a fly fishing guide.
Fly fishing?
Yeah. I'd be a guide.
Oh my God.
I'd be spending half my year in the South Island of New Zealand and half my year in Alaska or Montana.
I love fishing myself, but fly fishing has never really appealed to me. I'm more of a deep sea fishing guy, but maybe it's just something I haven't come across enough yet.
Yeah. If you come out here on a trip, I'll take you fly fishing.
Excellent. Well, looking forward to it, mate. Look, I think we've covered a lot of very important points today. I think a lot of listeners would learn a lot about security, IT technology. Most importantly, if anyone from the IT services is listening, I'm pretty sure they would have picked up a few gems in this conversation. I think, Denis, you've really explained some things really well. And hopefully our listeners who are in the IT services businesses would really have a lot of takeaways. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to approach you, Denis?
Probably on LinkedIn. It's Denis with one N, Denis O'Shea. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on any other social platforms. Or my email is simply denis@mobile-mentor.com. It's okay. denis@mobile-mentor.com.
Okay. I'll make sure to share all that in the description of this podcast. And as always, we'll be sharing this across all the major platforms, Spotify, Amazon, Apple. Sadly, Google has pulled a pin on their platforms, as they like doing. They do something for a while and they wrap that up. But anyway, that's just Google. Denis, mate, thank you very much for finding the time to jump on this podcast. I really enjoyed interviewing you. And I think we've uncovered a lot today, mate.
Thank you, Alexei. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, and keep up the great work.
For those who are listening, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any comments or anything, please comment just below the video if you are watching on YouTube or on any other platform. My name is Alexei. This is Better Business Podcast. I'll chat to you soon.